Sometimes, in the middle of chaos, some behaviors seem unavoidable, almost like an escape. They start out quietly, frequently as an effort to get rid of a nagging unease or emptiness. These decisions eventually turn into habits, and what first appeared to be a short-term fix turns into a vicious cycle. The pursuit of momentary respite and a momentary sensation of tranquility progressively turns into a detrimental pattern. However, what is the true cause of this cycle? Why would someone seek something they know is bad for them with such tenacity? In actuality, these actions frequently reflect a more serious injury. They are efforts to close a gap that appears to be insurmountable. The yearning to re-establish a connection with something that has been lost drives the person's actions, not only pleasure or instant relief. Even though this may appear to be devastation at first glance, what is really at risk is a covert quest for purpose and an effort to alleviate an unseen suffering that is beyond conscious awareness. Have you ever pondered why some people suddenly avoid temptations while others seem to fall into addictions with no way out? One of the most difficult and complicated problems in the human psyche is addiction. It can take many different shapes in our society, such as substance misuse or obsessive activities that frequently conceal a profound existential emptiness. What causes this nearly irresistible impulse to run away from reality? Is there a deeper issue that most of us are blind to, or is it simply a lack of willpower? This movie will examine addiction from the perspectives of Jung and Gabor Maté, a Hungarian author and doctor. It will look at how addiction shows up and why it frequently turns into a vicious cycle that is difficult to escape. We shall discover that our addictive habits are a reflection of unresolved internal issues, rather than merely reactions to outside stimuli. Our goal is to gain a greater understanding of addiction as a symptom of something more serious than just a behavioral issue. According to Carl Jung, addiction is a reflection of an unbalanced human psyche rather than just a moral failing or a defect in character. According to Jung, addictions are fundamentally ways of escaping psychological pain or an existential emptiness. An individual may turn to addictive habits as a short fix for a deeper suffering when they are unwilling to face their own internal problems. According to Jung, the psyche is a complex network of conscious and unconscious elements that constitutes a totality. Addiction is frequently the result of an unconscious attempt to satisfy an inner need. This emptiness can result from a variety of factors, such as a lack of purpose, emotional detachment, or unacknowledged or unaccepted psychological traits. Addictions, according to Jung, can be viewed as a way to escape reality. A person may turn to drugs or obsessive activities as a way to cope with life's stresses during stressful, agonizing, or existential crises. This escape, though, is seldom permanent, and it's frequently more harder to return to reality. This leads to a vicious cycle in which addiction exacerbates the issue rather than resolves it. In his book, The Kingdom of Hungry Ghosts, Gabor Maté states that false desires cannot be fully fulfilled no matter how often they are met. The brain is unable to sense when it has had enough, allowing it to unwind and focus on other important tasks. It seems as though you had to reach for additional food right away after finishing a meal because you were still hungry. According to Maté, an addiction is any recurring activity, whether related to substances or not, that a person feels driven to do despite the detrimental effects it has on their life and the lives of others. Substance addiction is frequently the first thing that comes to mind when we think of addictions. On the other hand, behavioral addictions are also rather prevalent and can have an equally detrimental impact on a person's life. Addiction may develop via compulsive usage of social media, pornography, video games, gambling, sex, shopping, or even from activities like working out or exercising. Furthermore, any interest can become an addiction, as Maté says. However, how can one tell the difference between the two? Who is in charge, the person or their actions, is the main query. While a passion can be mastered, an addiction is an uncontrollable, compulsive enthusiasm. Ask yourself a straightforward inquiry if you're unsure. Would you be willing to stop, considering the harm you are causing to both yourself and other people? You are an addict. If the answer is no, You've slipped into addiction if you are unable to stop the habit or fulfill your commitment to do so. The causes of addiction have been the subject of much discussion. Addiction is more accurately described as the outcome of the relationship between the subject and the object, despite the fact that some individuals describe it as a personal issue. When someone consistently longs for a shift in their subjective state or sense of being and is reliant on a thing or activity to produce this desired experiential change, they have developed an addiction. According to Natasha Schu's book, Addiction by Design, some products have a greater potential to cause or hasten an addiction because of their pharmacological or structural properties, just as some people are more susceptible to addiction. Their unique power resides in their capacity to produce the kind of persuading subjective transformation on which some people eventually become dependent. In this video, we will examine the personal side of the equation and look into what makes some people more prone to addiction than others, since we are surrounded by things and activities that have additive potential and always will be. Having worked with addicts for his entire career, Gabor Maté contends that all addiction, no matter how severe, is an attempt to find solace from emotional and physical anguish, regardless of whether it is caused by substances or behaviors. Suffering, whether apparent or concealed in the unconscious, is always the root cause of addiction. Chronic substance usage is the addict's desire to avoid pain, far more than a quest for pleasure. There are many different types of suffering that might cause someone to become addicted. Some develop addictions as a kind of self-medication for anxiety problems, despair, or insecurities. Others to handle extremely demanding relationships or occupations, and still others to prevent them from feeling hopeless or lacking a purpose in the face of their life existential emptiness. He asked a 47-year-old guy who had been addicted to drugs since he was a teenager why he kept using drugs, and the man said, "I don't know, I'm just trying to fill a void in my life, boredom, simply a lack of direction," according to Gabor Maté. Addiction is often a way for people to cope with emotional anguish that stems from their history, particularly from their early years. The majority of hard drug addicts, according to studies, were raised in abusive households. According to Jung's Gabor Maté, a lot of substance abusers claim to self-medicate in order to ease their emotional suffering. Furthermore, their traumatic experiences have hampered the development of their brains. Such conditions simply prevent the proper development of the dopamine and opioid systems, the limbic brain, which controls emotions, the stress system, and the parts of the cortex that control impulses. But a person's susceptibility to addiction is not limited to early trauma. Addiction is also far more common in adulthood among children who had emotionally aloof or uncaring parents. This state of parental emotional absence was dubbed close separation by psychologist Alan Shaw. All of the child's bodily needs are met by the parent who is physically present. However, the father fails to provide psychological and emotional support to the child because of stress, sadness, or other inner demons. A father who is physically present but emotionally absent can also cause emotional suffering for a child, as Gabor Maté explains in The Kingdom of Hungry Ghosts. In most cases, a son who feels this emotional distance would want to get back in touch with his father. Inappropriate coping strategies like rocking or thumb-sucking will be developed by the child as self-soothing techniques if the father doesn't react or doesn't react appropriately, or they'll just unplug to get away from the pain. Later in life, children who have not experienced the loving presence of their father are more likely to turn to other sources for chemical fulfillment. However, even those who had a happy upbringing are not immune to addiction today, because, similar to the fall of Rome, when a large number of people turned to pleasure-seeking to ease the suffering brought on by a deteriorating culture, many people today use addictions as a kind of self-medication to combat the hopelessness sparked by a pessimistic outlook on the future of society. Additionally, the need to embrace consumerism as a way of life and obsessively use technology, social media, and entertainment to escape feelings of helplessness and emptiness in order to fit in with the modern world creates the ideal social storm that has led to an addiction crisis. A deficient sense of emptiness pervades our entire culture, writes Gabor Maté. Most people are not as profoundly conscious of this emptiness as the addict is. In our futile attempts to fill the spiritual black hole, the void at the center of which we lose touch with our soul and spirit, with sources of purpose and value that are neither contingent nor transitory, many of us resemble addicts. We are further depleted by our consumer culture, which is fixated on acquisition, action, and image. It's not surprising that many people use drugs and behavioral addictions as a coping mechanism, given the large number of people who grow up with abusive or emotionally distant parents and the corrupt state of society. The incessant search for something to relieve emotional pain can lead us into destructive patterns that are difficult to escape. But do we really understand what lies behind these behaviors? Keep watching to find out how the vision of Carl Jung and Gabor Maté can help us better understand this cycle. Addictions work, even if only momentarily, so this action is not entirely illogical or ineffective. They are excellent for relieving emotional distress and suffering. The account of a drug addict who gave an explanation for his drug use is mentioned by Gabor Maté. It's so I don't experience the emotions I do when I'm not using medications, because indulgence can momentarily pull a person out of the routine or sorrow of daily life and lead them to moments full of passion, significance, and joy. Addictions are not simply successful at relieving suffering and emotional anguish. In his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, psychologist William James revealed the effects of alcohol at the turn of the 20th century. James noted that in addition to relieving stress, alcohol can also create a state akin to a spiritual experience, at least until alcohol poisoning affects the body and mind. Alcohol's ability to arouse the mystical aspects of human nature is surely the reason for its supremacy over humanity. Sobriety devalues, excludes, and refuses. Drunkenness grows, combines, and affirms. The fact that many of us are only given glimpses of what we instantly perceive to be magnificent at the early and brief stages of what is, in its entirety, such a degrading poisoning is the major exciter of the yes function in man and is a part of the deeper mystery and tragedy of life. Addictions that rely on quick fixes for happiness and emotional relief may be effective in the short term, but they eventually cost you. Our tolerance increases and our reliance on the substance or activity to experience any pleasurable mood increases as we continue to engage in an addiction. Addiction gradually takes center stage in our lives, pushing aside everything else that can provide us long-term fulfillment, including our relationships, creativity, careers, and sense of purpose in life. Furthermore, addiction changes the brain's structure in ways that impair our ability to exercise free will. We frequently experience what is known as brain lock when we are ensnared in an addiction, which forces our behavior to follow our addictive impulses, while a part of our consciousness observes closely but helplessly, fully aware that we are ruining our potential, body, and mind. Given addiction's powerful hold, the crucial question comes up: how likely is it that an addiction will be overcome? The issue with any endeavor to live a new, addiction-free life is that the brain's healing mechanism is also the one that is harmed by addiction. According to Gabor Maté, the more severe the addiction, the more disordered the brain is and the more biological barriers there are to getting healthy. Thankfully, our minds are extremely robust. It is conceivable for the brain to reorganize itself, even in old age, allowing one to live a full, healthy, and addiction-free life, possibly for the first time. This leads us to the intriguing idea of nodal awareness, because it enables a person to experience the entire range of human experience with great serenity, rather than giving in to the polarities of pleasure and pain, yearning and fulfillment. This form of awareness can break the cycle of addiction. According to Carl Jung, awareness is the first step in breaking any vicious habit. The person is destined to repeat the same behaviors without understanding the cause of their issues if they are unable to go deep and identify their own internal systems. Since it enables the person to see that addiction is an escape from the true psychological issue rather than the solution, this awareness process is an essential first step towards transformation. Therefore, acknowledging the presence of addiction and its effects on a person's life is the first step towards overcoming it. This may seem straightforward, yet many people spend years caught in a vicious cycle of denial without ever seriously considering the causes of their detrimental behavior. The healing process might start if the addiction is acknowledged as a short-term fix for a more serious ailment. The person must now consider the elements in their life that contributed to their addiction. Without reflection, a person is unable to comprehend the underlying reasons behind their actions. According to Jung, the human mind is made up of many layers of symbols and complexes that are frequently concealed until a person is prepared to examine themselves. Jung argues that addiction is an unconscious attempt to cope with inner shadows and sorrow, a symbolic expression of what lies concealed in the psyche. In fact, a person is beginning the process of individuation when they start to think about their addiction. A key idea in Jung's psychology is individuation, which is the act of combining all facets of the psyche, both positive and negative, into a whole. Without passing judgment, this entails examining the shadow and suppressed parts with an open mind in order to learn from them. Although it can be difficult, this introspection and self-awareness process is essential to emancipation. When it comes to addiction, introspection aids in recognizing thinking and emotion patterns that support compulsive behavior. An alcoholic might recognize, for instance, that drinking has turned into a coping mechanism for feelings of purposelessness or loneliness. In this instance, addiction is about more than simply the drug. It's about the protective mechanism it serves against emotional pain. The individual can replace the addiction with more positive behaviors if they are able to think about this and start searching for healthier ways to deal with their emotions and loneliness. Almost everything we do is an effort to address our own issues. Addiction is essentially a more severe kind of repetitive behavior that leaves behind lasting neurological effects on the brain. These trails eventually get so deep that they are practically unavoidable and, in some ways, unavoidable. The idea of non-duality and Carl Jung both have a similar stance on addiction. Both imply that the transcendence of the distinct self, or the suffering and contradiction of the ego, are the answers to the addiction issue. But there's a distinction. By attempting to unify the various facets of the psyche, what he dubbed the archetypes of the self, Jung aims to resolve the self's dilemma. A spiritual awakening and a profound shift in awareness are triggered when this occurs because the person feels a sense of self-transcending wholeness and is no longer at war with themselves. Addiction-related behavior patterns are also altered by this fundamental shift in consciousness. When it comes to addiction, the most frequent error people make is to believe that it is only a matter of not having enough willpower. Addiction is actually the complete opposite of this. It is actually a reflection of the understanding that addiction is more than just a personal failure to find a solution. This acknowledges the necessity of a force greater than one's own if one wants to genuinely break free from the grip of addiction without undermining personal accountability. Even though beating addiction is ultimately an internal process, social support is essential to recovery. Carl Jung acknowledged that people are social creatures by nature and that interpersonal ties have a significant impact on the mind. Accordingly, addiction is linked to societal and cultural factors that can either support or impede healing, even though it frequently stems from internal difficulties. To put it another way, the process of beating addiction cannot be carried out alone. Having other people's support is crucial for fostering change and total recovery. According to Jung, human development occurs within a web of interpersonal and group relationships. The person is profoundly affected by these relationships, which significantly shape their mind. This implies that friendships, family, the social environment, and even larger societal structures can either help or impede the healing process in the context of addiction. The emotional or social isolation that often precedes addiction occurs when a person distances themselves from others, whether out of embarrassment, fear of criticism, or the belief that they are unintelligible. Therefore, a process of social reintegration must go hand in hand with the path to recovery from addiction. This entails establishing new support systems and re-establishing relationships with friends, family, and the community. Good social connections can provide an environment for growth, acceptance, and understanding, all of which are critical components of healing. But not all connections are healthy, and it's critical that the person keeps their distance from those who can encourage self-destructive conduct or feed their addiction. Therefore, the process of individuation entails a deliberate choice of the individuals and settings that are most conducive to development and recovery. Friends and relatives are not the only people who can provide social support. The support system provided by many rehabilitation programs, like anonymous groups, can be equally effective. People who are going through similar things gather in these groups to talk about their struggles, successes, and experiences. Even just hearing and being listened to can have a profoundly positive healing impact. Jung recognized that shared stories and collective experiences provide people a sense of belonging that is crucial for healing by letting them know they are not alone in their struggles. Addiction is essentially a severely dysfunctional attempt to address a spiritual issue that most individuals, addicted or not, share. Not every story ends happily, as Gabor Maté explains in his book, The Kingdom of Hungry Ghosts. However, we are reassured that no human being is ever beyond redemption by scientific discoveries, spiritual revelations, and heart-centered teachings. If this content has brought you new perspectives on how addictions work and how they can be overcome, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel to grow and bring these reflections to more people. And if you're not already subscribed, take the opportunity to subscribe and keep following content like this. What struck you most about what was discussed here? Leave a comment. I want to know what you think.